Okay, good morning. As mentioned last week, we're going to look at the laws relating to the people present and who is covered by the Birchas Kohanim, the blessing of the Kohanim. We discussed in the Gemara, so we'll look at the halachas. The truth is that there are some more laws that we're going to cover regarding Birchas Kohanim, the blessing of the Kohanim. And there's some other laws besides for those who are covered. We talked about the Kohanim moving his feet. We talked about the Kohanim standing. We talked about them raising their hands. We talked about them Hebrew language. We talked about the leader calling out word for word. So we talked about more than what we're looking up in laws. And maybe what we should have done is just go through all the laws of the Kohanim and then read all the laws in the Gemara and then read the whole set of laws in the Code of Jewish Law. Maybe we'll do that later, but it's quite a large set of laws when it comes to the Birchas Kohanim. So
Whatever you do is good enough for me.
maybe we'll get back to that then. Okay, so we're looking at section 128 in the Code of Jewish Laws, the Rebbe's Code of Jewish Law. The title of the chapter is Laws Relating to the Priestly Blessing, the Factors that Disqualify a Kohen. So the factors that disqualify Kohen is not in our Gemara, but the other laws are, like when the Birchas Kohanim happens, when the Kohen has to move his feet, the standing, the Hebrew, the hands, the facing the Kohanim. So a lot of those laws are in our Gemara, but not all of them, which is kind of why I'm like still unsure about going through all the laws that aren't really related to our Gemara. Sorry?
No, I'm agreeing.
Yeah, and there's 60 subsections in this one chapter, so it's a lot to cover.
Maybe you could just select out the ones that are on.
So that's what I'm thinking. So for now, we're going to select the laws relating to those who are covered by the Birchas Kohanim. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to subsection 23. Scrolling down here. Now, at this point in this set of laws, the Rebbe is discussing the Chazan, the leader, calling out to the Kohen. So he's going through the wording, the verbalization. He's already gone through the Kohen standing up. He's gone through the hands, and now he's talking about the word, the pronunciation. So there he says. So here he's talking about the Kohanim, really. He's not talking about the laws of the people. He's talking about the Kohanim. And there he says, I'm going to read it in English in the translation. The priestly blessing may be conferred only in the holy tongue. Right? This is what began our whole discussion. The fact that the Sotah, her oath has to be administered in the original Hebrew. Same with the Birchas Kohanim, has to be done in the original Hebrew. So it must be done in the holy language while standing, also discussed in our Gemara, and in a loud voice, and with raised hands, all discussed in our Gemara. If the Kohanim deviated from this with regard to even one of these factors, they have not fulfilled their obligation even after the fact. Meaning there are some things that it's best to do it that way. And if you don't do it that way, you still fulfill your obligation, but not in the optimal manner. Here, these are requirements that would invalidate the whole mitzvah if it's not done this way. Holy language, Lashon Kodesh, Hebrew, standing out loud, and raised hands. There's 4 elements. The sages explain the source for these requirements as follows. To recite the blessing in the holy language, this is derived from the verse which says, you shall bless. Like this, so shall you bless. Like this you shall bless, i.e. only in this language. Right? We learned this is from our Gemara. Right? It's our Gemara. Like this you shall bless. While standing, this is derived from the verse which reads, quote, God set apart the tribe of Levi to stand before God, to serve him, and to bless his name. Just as a service in the Beis Hamikdash must be performed while standing, as it is written to stand and to serve, so too the blessing is to be conferred while standing, also in our Gemara, right? The congregants, however, and this is why I'm quoting this section, because he's talking about the obligation of the Kohanim to be standing and to speak in Hebrew. The congregants, however, may sit during the priestly blessing as long as they are facing the Kohanim.
Who can sit?
The congregants. as long as they are facing the Kohanim. This is derived from the phrase, Amar lahem, say to them. Right? Remember, we had this double expression where God tells Moshe, speak to the sons of Aaron, tell them, like this they shall bless the people, say to them. So this extra word, say to them, told us that the blessing needs to be done as conversation. And thus, they should be facing each other. Right? Say to them, i.e., say the blessing just as a person talking to a friend speaks to him face to face. However, after the fact, failure to do so does not invalidate the performance of the mitzvah, meaning if you aren't facing the Kohanim. This is indicated by the fact that if all the inhabitants of the town are Kohanim, so here the author writes, not just all the people in Shul, not just all the people in the synagogue, but all the people in the entire town are Kohanim. We'll see soon why the author says that.
Wait, what's after the fact?
Even if you're not facing the Kohanim,
Oh. Okay.
it's still valid. As long as you're in front of them, as we'll see soon. But even if you're not facing them, it's still valid. The Kohen standing, if he's sitting, then it invalidates. The Kohen's hands up, if he doesn't have hands up, it invalidates. Loud voice, lack of loud voice is invalid. But even though the people are supposed to be facing the Kohen, if they're not, it's still valid. Which is a beautiful thing. We've been talking about this idea that the blessing comes from above to below, irrespective of the people. And we mentioned that the Gemara still requires that the person face, because you have to be aware of your blessing. You have to open up your eyes to the blessing. And here we're learning that's the optimal way to receive your blessing, is to be open to it. But even if you're not open to the blessing, it's still coming.
Plus, also, the giver is really just a pure vessel of the.
That's correct. That's been the whole theme here.
So
That's right. So the Kohen has to make sure.
There's more leniency. Because
That's right. That's right. The Kohen, who's a conduit, has to make sure he's a clean conduit, a squeaky clean conduit without any interference. Whereas the recipient is just the recipient. So best case scenario, you're an actual open recipient, so you're facing the Kohen. But if not, the blessing's still flowing.
Yeah.
And it still there, and therefore doesn't invalidate the blessing.
Good comment.
That's right.
When you do it, your thumbs have to be facing down, and this hand should be
A little higher, yeah. Yeah. Right hand a little higher than the left, yeah. Okay. So what's the Alter Rebbe's proof that after the fact, if you're not facing the Kohanim, it's still valid? What's the Alter Rebbe's proof? So this is indicated by the fact that if all the inhabitants of a town are Kohanim, not just all the people in the shul, but all the people in the whole town, we'll see soon why the Alter Rebbe says that. So what happens if they're all Kohanim? What's the law? We learned this in the Gemara, no? What's the law? If everybody's a Kohen, they all go up to give the blessing. They all go up to confer the priest's blessing, even though they are not doing so like a person speaking to his friend face to face. Even though no one's in synagogue to respond to them.
You have to send 10 down.
Sorry?
You have to send 10 down to the.
No one's there. That's the point. All the just Kohen, who does the blessing go to? We learned in the Gemara. It covers people out in the field, right?
Split it half. You don't.
1 second, we'll get to that in a second. But before we get to let's understand what they're trying to do here. Let's put aside the laws with respect to all the Kohanim. We'll get to that in a moment. But Dr. was trying to prove here that face to face after the fact is still valid if it's lacking, right? That's what we're trying to prove now. So let's not get into the details of the laws of what happens when the whole town is Kohen.
No, I was just.
1 second. Let's just get there in a second. Let's just first understand what Dr. was trying to do. Then we'll address that. Dr. was trying to prove that face to face is not a requirement, but after the fact, even if it's not face to face, it's still valid. What's the proof? Answer: because where do we derive that it has to be face to face? Because the pasuk says, "Amar lahem," say to them, and therefore it has to be in conversation. In a town where there are only kohanim, so all the people blessing are kohanim. The shul is empty. There's no face to face conversation, and yet that blessing is still valid. Proof that the face to face element is not a requirement that invalidates the blessing. Otherwise, you'd be required to have someone in the crowd to have that face-to-face conversation. Clear?
Yeah, I don't know if I
Okay.
understand that because.
Okay, now ask your question.
There are no non-Kohanim, so it's a bit hard to. like apples and oranges. It's really not.
There's no one, not just
No, I know.
non-kohanim.
So it's really not a proof because it's, to me, it's like you don't have non-Kohanim, so you really can't tell if the
Let's back up a
person
second.
talking about.
If the verse says that the blessing has to be in conversation, then it'd be a requirement to have a conversation.
Yeah, but when the verse said to tell them, it was meaning tell the non-Kohanim, right?
Which means that unless you have non-kohanim, it's invalid. Either way. If those words in the verse, in other words, there's the verse which says you have to be standing. The verse says to be standing. If you're sitting, it's invalid. Right? So a verse says you have to have a conversation. If it's not conversation, invalid. So get a non-kohen. And if not, no blessing. And the fact that we don't say that is proof that this idea of conversation does not undermine the actual blessing. Otherwise, it would be a biblical obligation like all the other ones that are derived from the verse. And if they're missing, it invalidates the mitzvah. Following? That's the logic.
But surely if the whole town is full of kohen,
Yeah.
not all of them are able to go up there. Some are disqualified.
Okay, assuming th're all qualified.
Yeah.
Assuming they're all qualified, the point, in other words, you're getting to the details of that law. The point is, the theoretical concept of a kohen blessing a room that's empty is a truth in halacha, indicating that the requirement to have face-to-face conversation is not a requirement that would undermine it if it's lacking, like the other biblical obligations, like standing, like hands spread out, like Hebrew.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Likewise, finally, the other condition was that the kohen has to say it in a loud voice. This is derived from the same phrase, say to them, i.e. the blessing must be articulated in a way a person speaks to his friend, which is loud enough for him to hear. Here, likewise, the kohanim should not whisper the blessing to themselves, but should say it loudly enough to be heard by the people present. And if that's missing, it is invalid, even though it comes from the same phrase, which means their activity, the kohen's activity, must be as if they're speaking to face with someone, even if there's no one there.
So even if there's no one there, they still have to say it in a loud voice.
That's correct. They, to your point earlier,
Yeah.
as the conduits of God's blessing, they have to do it properly. If the recipients aren't there properly, still valid, even if the room's empty or if people's backs are facing them. Okay? As an initial preference, it should be recited in the most desirable tones, neither overly loud nor low, but rather the intermediate volume. Okay, so now we're going to skip the next set of laws, because again, this was only this law here that said that that the crowd doesn't have to stand, they could sit, so long as they're facing the kohanim. And then we added, but if they don't face the kohanim, it's still valid. That was only put into this section because we're discussing the fact that the kohen has to be standing. And we compared it to the people who don't have to be standing. But this isn't the main section without ever discussing the law of facing the kohen. Following? So let's now skip ahead in this chapter to subsection 33, I believe it is.
33.
Hold on a second. Sorry, not 33. I'm sorry, not 33. 37. And here we discuss the laws that the recipients are required to follow in order for the blessing to be valid. So this is where we are now. So before it was only raised in comparison to the kohen. The kohen has to stand. The people should stand. If they don't, it's okay. The people should face the kohen, but if they don't, it's okay. Right now, let's discuss the actual laws that are required from the recipient's part. That's subsection 37 and 38. In English translation, the people who are behind the kohanim are not included in the priestly blessing, for it may be conferred only face to face, as we explained above. So in other words, in front of them, even if their backs are facing them. Or maybe the Alter Rebbe means that the blessing is still valid, even if the people aren't facing them, that the people who aren't facing them aren't covered.
I think that's what you mean.
Maybe that's not what I meant. That doesn't invalidate the blessing if they're, in other words, there's two elements here. Number one is the mitzvah to bless. That mitzvah is performed even if no one's facing them. But as for the people, they might not be covered if their back is facing. That's a possibility.
Because there's people outside of shul.
Let's go back to 23 and see.
Right, they're
Okay, we'll get to that in a second. Yeah.
being there doesn't invalidate the blessing, and there's plenty of people outside that are behind me.
We'll get to that in a second. We'll get to that in a second, actually. Let's see the Hebrew here. Actually, let's see for a second. I'm sorry, I'm distracting because maybe it means they're not covered, even though the blessing is still valid.
That would be the whole proof.
Even if they were to give it back.
The whole proof is that.
Yeah. Yeah, so the blessing is still valid, even though the people may not be covered because their back is facing the blessing. In other words,
Their back is facing, or they're behind.
the behind is one thing, but the back also.
The back also.
Yeah, facing the back also. So, in other words, the blessing is there, they're just not picking it up. Something like that. Okay, let's go forward. Subsection 37. Okay, the people who are behind the kohen are not included in the priestly blessing, for may be conferred only face to face, as has been explained above, which we just read in subsection 23. Now, as to those who are in front of them and at their sides, the sages taught that not even an iron barrier can separate Israel from their Father in heaven. Those people, however, must turn to face the kohen. All right? Yeah? They have to face the kohen. Now, so in front of the kohenim, all covered, even an iron curtain. The people standing behind the kohenim, let's see what happens with people who are outside of synagogue. We'll see in a second. The people standing behind the kohenim, but at their sides. So not directly behind them, but like at a
Periphery.
periphery, but behind. But if we draw a horizontal line from the kohenim's shoulders, they're behind that. Even though they're not directly behind. Yeah. To illustrate, they are standing at the eastern wall of the synagogue, where the ark projects slightly from the wall into the synagogue, and the kohenim are standing in front of it. So, like an hour shul, they're standing on the podium in front of the ark, and the people are standing where I sit. I sit facing the actual podium from the side. That's where I sit. So if the kohenim are standing there, I'm not in front of the kohenim, I'm behind the kohenim, even though I'm facing them, right?
So it'd be like that, like here's the kohenim, and then the people would be like.
Would be
on the outside,
would be like here.
A little bit behind, but a little bit
behind. They're not behind, because behind is here. They're on the sides.
This is my front, sorry.
Oh yeah, sorry. So I was looking the other way.
Yeah, sorry. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right.
Poor guy standing against the wall.
That's right. So again, so the people, to illustrate, they are standing at the eastern wall of the synagogue, which means parallel to the ark, where the ark projects slightly from the wall into the synagogue, and the kohenim are standing in front of it, in front of the ark. So someone who's on the eastern wall is a little farther east than the actual space that the kohenim are occupying, which is in front of the ark that's protruding somewhat from the eastern wall. So if I'm standing at the eastern wall, I'm not parallel to them, I'm not behind them, but I'm behind them and then I'm farther east from them, and they are facing west. Following? So even if those standing next to the wall turn the face to the kohenim, so I'm standing east facing the kohenim, so I'm facing north or south.
wait, the kohenim is, their back is to
the kohenim are back to the ark and they're facing west.
they're facing east, if their back is to the ark.
Facing east.
Facing east,
They're standing at the eastern wall of the synagogue,
right? If they're
as in Western Europe, where the congregants face east. So us is the reverse, yeah. We face west.
we face west,
But
the kohenim face east.
Yes, but in Russia, it was the reverse. Same thing.
Oh,
In Russia, it's the reverse, right? Because
I was thinking.
Russia is east of Israel, so they're facing west.
No, understood. I was thinking.
No, sorry. Sorry. As in Western Europe, where the congregants face east towards Eretz Yisrael.
They face east.
Which we do too. No, we face east. This is correct. We face east when we pray, which means the kohenim are facing west. That's what I said.
Okay.
They're standing at the eastern wall facing west. That's what I said, right? Yeah, we got it right the first time. Sorry. As opposed to Russia, which is the reverse, actually. They were facing west because they're in Eastern Europe.
So the people on the outskirts of this group of recipients
on the outskirts.
They're still.
They're standing at the eastern wall, facing north or south.
Yeah.
And the Kohanim are in the center. But they are farther,
Facing.
and the Kohanim are in the center facing west.
Facing.
West.
West.
That would be facing the crowd.
Oh.
The ark is on the eastern wall, which means if there's, yes, the ark is on the eastern wall.
What you're trying to say, coins are facing
Where's
this
the
way,
ark on the eastern wall?
people here.
The ark is on the eastern wall, in the center of the eastern wall, facing west. Which means the people who pray facing east. Following or
It
no?
was on the western wall.
Sorry?
I thought the ark was on the western wall.
Not over here, because we got to face Jerusalem. Jerusalem is east of us. We face east.
Okay.
Right?
I was thinking the Temple Mount.
Temple Mount is west.
I was thinking in the synagogue, thinking at the Temple Mount.
In a synagogue, here in Canada, or anywhere west of Israel, everybody's praying facing east. So the ark is on the eastern wall. So the Kohanim, when they bless, are standing in front of the eastern wall facing west, the crowd.
They're facing west.
The Kohanim are facing west because they face the crowd with their backs to the eastern wall. But the congregants are all facing east.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Now here's a fellow who's standing at the eastern wall. His left shoulder is the eastern wall, so he's facing north, but he's standing at the eastern wall. But the Kohanim aren't standing with their backs literally to the eastern wall. They're standing a couple of feet forward from the eastern wall because there's their ark there with a protruding platform. Right? Which means, yeah, 1 second, which means that the people who are facing south are farther east than the Kohanim. Because the Kohanim are standing 5 feet away from the eastern wall, whereas this guy's standing 2 inches from the eastern wall. Clear?
Yeah.
So if we draw a horizontal line, north and south from the Kohanim shoulders, they're standing east of that. And the Kohanim are facing west. That's exactly right.
The coin are facing this way, but the poor guy over here.
Yeah, exactly right.
is losing out.
Exactly. So it's my spot and shoal versus the Kohanim.
So Miller and Perry.
That whole section. Yeah. Okay. Clear.
Yeah.
So now,
But
even
are they when they, okay, so they're behind the Kohanim.
they're behind the Kohanim, meaning that they're
How are
farther
they
east
facing now? Still east?
because they're facing south or north.
No, I mean, they're on the side. They're not facing north-south.
They're facing north-south toward the Kohanim, toward the center.
Oh, towards the center. Okay, so they are facing north-south.
They're facing the Kohanim,
Right, okay.
but not to the face of the Kohanim. They're facing the shoulder of the Kohanim.
Facing the shoulders.
It's all right. So even if those standing next to the wall turn their face toward the Kohanim, either north or south, depending on which side of the eastern wall they're
They're
standing,
sort of in an ambiguous situation
they are not included in the blessing. No ambiguity.
because they're half.
So that's the point. In front of the Kohanim means that everything forward from the Kohanim's shoulder. Again, draw an imaginary parallel line from the Kohanim's shoulder to the end, to north and south. Anything in front of that. Anything behind that is not covered. No, just ask people standing here to move back, as we always do every time. Yeah, we clear? All right, continues out to that. The people in the fields, remember we discussed when we learned this, the Gemara said that a city that's full of Kohanim, all the Kohanim go up to bless. And who are they blessing? They're blessing the people in the field. So we discussed, does that mean specifically in the field? Or does it mean anybody that's not in shul? Which one? Right. So I mentioned to you that Rashi seems to imply anybody who's out of the synagogue. Where is it? I'm not on this page here. But Rashi seems to imply anybody that's not in the synagogue. But it's not the halacha. The halacha is like this. The people in the fields are considered as being held back by force beyond their control, for they are preoccupied with their work and are unable to come to synagogue. Accordingly, they are included in the blessing, even if they are behind the Kohanim. So the Kohanim are standing on the eastern wall, they're facing west, and here's guys who are working in the field farther east. So they're behind the Kohanim. They're still covered in the blessing. Because they're stuck. What do you want them to do? Come into town for a blessing? That's a half day's work. Okay. By contrast, anyone who is in the town and could come to synagogue to receive the blessing face to face as ordained by the Torah, but does not come, shows that he does not consider the blessing important enough to warrant his coming to the synagogue. He is therefore not included in the blessing if he's behind the Kohenim. Which means, if I'm at home and I live west of MTC, you're covered in the blessing. It's only if you're behind. Which means, so long as there's a synagogue in town that is farther west of you, which would mean there's some kohenim somewhere facing your direction blessing, you're covered in the blessing. So again, follow?
Why don't they put coin on both sides?
I don't know. For the same reason, anyone who's in the town and who could come to the synagogue to receive the blessing, but does not, even one standing in the courtyard of the synagogue who cannot enter the synagogue because he does not have place, if he's standing behind the eastern wall, he's not included in the blessing because he's behind the kohenim. The rationale is that he could stand on the western side and thus be facing the kohenim, or he could stand on the side of the synagogue and turn his face to the synagogue and the kohenim, as long as he's not behind that parallel line from the shoulders of the kohenim. So, what's the most western synagogue in Montreal? Which way is west? West is that way. Trans-Canadian. So,
Montreal, Kirkland,
yeah, synagogues all the way out there.
St. Lazare.
Actually, the shliach in Kirkland is a kohen. So he's covering the whole city. Okay, we're clear. We're getting more clarity. Yeah. Similarly, the people standing at the eastern wall of the synagogue are not considered as being held back by force beyond their control. Meaning, someone who like insists on sitting in my seat, which is to the western wall. You're not considered, but you're not considered stuck. Walk 3 feet. Right? It is true that at present, everyone purchases a place in the synagogue and no one may stand in another place. However, one can move to the usual place of the kohenim, which will now be empty. So even if your community are such sticklers for their seats that they won't let you stand in the aisle, and they won't let you stand next to someone else who bought his seat, and therefore you're stuck in your place. You're not stuck in your place. Whichever kohen is standing on the bima, go to his seat for a little bit. Or stand in the middle of the synagogue at the reader's dais, or at the western side of the synagogue, or in the courtyard to the west of the synagogue, or at the side of the synagogue that the priestly blessing can be heard from there. Yeah, you can always find a place that's farther west of the kohenim, even if you have to go out of the synagogue. But you're still covered in the blessing.
If you're at home and we're making the blessings, you're behind us.
In my house? No, I'm behind. I'm this way. I'd be facing you. My house is farther west of MTC, as is yours. Our houses are that way. Yeah, it's the western parking lot behind us parking lot.
You're
Okay.
more west of the synagogue.
You're covered. If you're more west of the synagogue, you're covered. Yeah. Okay. On the other hand, one authority offers justification for those.
Can't be east of the kohen.
Sorry.
It can't be east of the kohen.
Again, you draw a parallel line from the shoulders of the kohenim, and anything behind them, anything east of that, is not covered. Right? Okay, so, but unless you're someone stuck in the field out there, then you're covered even if you're behind them. Right.
Meaning today's setting in context would be
Someone stuck in
work, some work.
Drummondville, I don't know.
Work, if they
Something
take a loss and.
Something like that, yeah.
Like that.
Okay, on the other hand,
Other confinements beyond their control.
That's right. On the other hand, one authority offers justification for those standing by the eastern wall, in my spot, even though we said before it's not an excuse, you got to walk forward, just walk forward or find a place in the back of shoal or something like that. On the other hand, one authority offers justification for those standing by the eastern wall, explaining that since the ark is connected to the wall, it is considered as part of the wall. Thus, it is as if the kohenim are standing next to the wall, and as if the people are actually standing at the side of the kohenim. In other words, there are those that want to say that the fact that the kohenim protrude 2, 3, 4 feet from the eastern wall is not because they want to be standing there, but technically because they can't be standing farther back east. So instead of drawing a parallel line
So it's a
from the
sliding-
shoulders,
it's a sliding line.
so instead of drawing a parallel line from the shoulders, draw a parallel line from the most eastern spot they would be standing, which is the wall. And then for anybody standing before that wall, but then that's a justification that shouldn't be used in the first case scenario. Better move forward where you're actually more west of the Kohen, right? Provided they turn to face turn to face them. Congregants who are conscientious, nevertheless, take heed to leave the eastern wall and move a little west until they're facing the Kohen, or until they're at least directly at the side. Okay, so one more law. So we get to this law of a town that's fully
It's so crowded.
Kohen.
Presumably.
So he says you can even walk out. You can even walk out of synagogue as long as you're more west,
Right.
because then at least you're covered,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So stand in the Kiddush room
As long as your face.
as long as your face is all right, as long as you're forward of the Kohen. Okay, one more law. Subsection 38. When all the inhabitants of the town or congregants in a synagogue are all Kohanim.
I'm sorry, could I just?
Yeah.
interrupt?
Yeah.
So you don't have to say amen to these blessings to be covered.
Okay, technically you don't, but he did say that that if you're on the eastern wall and you're trying to find a place forward, you should find a place where you can hear the Kohen.
That's the ideal.
Or at the side of the synagogue, or at the side of the synagogue, the priestly blessing can be heard from there. So he did say that, but it doesn't seem like they have to hear it to be covered.
No.
Because if not-
Real,
Yeah,
you
exactly,
can't hear it.
exactly. Which I imagine would mean that back in the old day, they would build the synagogues at the easternmost point, at the westernmost point of town. And in that way, the entire town is covered in Birchas Kohen. Why wouldn't they?
No, the easternmost one, right?
No, because then they'd be facing
That everybody's western.
the easternmost point. Yeah, sorry, yes, easternmost point, so that everybody's, that's right.
Yeah.
Right, so I'm not looking for the West Island synagogue for Kirkland. I'm looking for the most eastern synagogue. I'm looking for
Eastern,
Sherbrooke.
Because you want everybody west. of-
That's right, yes. So I'm not looking for Kirkland, I'm looking for Sherbrooke, which also has a Chabad, so that's
Then-
good.
Then maybe you're not covered.
No, I am, because
No,
I'm
'cause you're on the.
I'm west. I'm west, I'm
You're
west.
on the west, yeah, you were.
No, I'm right the way,
you're
I'm the west, yeah. So are you. Okay, so when all the inhabitants of a town or congregants in the synagogue are Kohanim, and only 10 are present.
I wouldn't do them, I'm on the east.
No, but they,
Well, east is like.
yeah, well, the
That's-
Kohanim,
That's Mac east west.
no, wait a second. If we were to draw a
East, west.
if we were to draw a parallel line from the Kohanim shoulders and shoulder,
Uh-huh.
you'd be forward of that line by a half a block,
Yeah, okay,
right? I think.
no, I think that's more,
Oh, maybe not.
I'm
Yeah.
more east.
It's okay. So
Sun's coming up
you're
from
covered by
here.
Chaver Kadisha.
Sun's coming up from here, it goes like
Yeah,
that.
but you're covered by Chaver Kadisha.
Okay.
All right. When all the inhabitants of a town or congregants in a synagogue are Kohanim, and only 10 are present, right? So if you have more than 10, then 10 go up to bless, and the rest stay down to answer Amen, right? But when all the inhabitants of the town or congregants in a synagogue are Kohanim, and only 10 are present, they should all ascend to the dais to bless the people. Whom are they blessing? Their brethren in the field. That was our Gemara. Who should respond Amen? The women and young children. This is something we didn't see in the Gemara. Our Gemara didn't say that. In the source here, they put the Jerusalem Talmud. The women and children answer Amen. Our Gemara implied that no one's answering Amen. Or at least that was like the
They're in the synagogue?
children and women would be in the synagogue to hear answer Amen. Now, even though there's no one to summon them by calling out Kohanim, and there's no one to prompt them word for word, because the Chazan is also a Kohen, so he's also going up to bless, assuming he can keep concentration when he walks back down, as we discussed in the Gemara. In this case, we're talking about it with the whole shoulders. There's only 10 people, and they're all Kohanim, so the Chazan is also a Kohen. He's also got to go up. So there's no one to call out Kohanim, and there's no one to prompt them word for word. Says the Alter Rebbe, this is of no consequence, for the calling and prompting are not an absolute requirement, as was stated above, meaning it's the best case scenario, but doesn't invalidate if it didn't happen, right? So according to the authorities who maintain that a Kohen who does not recite the priestly blessing may summon his fellow Kohanim and may prompt them, in the present instance too, the Shliach Tzibur, who is a Kohen, the Chazan is a Kohen, and does not recite the priestly blessing, may summon them and prompt them. So like you said, if you have one Kohen who's invalid, let him be Chazan, and he'll prompt the other 9. This applies even though he is certain that his concentration will not be disrupted since he's a Kohen and there are other Kohenim present. So, because in a case, so according to some opinions, you keep one guy down to be chazan to call him out. Otherwise, other opinions, all 10 will go up and no one prompting, so no one prompting.
Does he have to turn around?
Yes, he goes back to being chazan and faces forward, yeah. So he's walking in the middle of his Amida, which
First, he's facing the coins. He's Kohanim.
but he doesn't call out Kohanim. When it gets to the priestly blessing, he steps down from his spot, goes to the dais, does the blessing, and goes back to the spot to continue davening. Which is why the Gemara said, and the Shulchan Aruch says this, that we have to make sure the guy has to be confident that he can maintain his decorum and not lose his spot in doing so. Otherwise, he stays where he is, and he would prompt the Kohanim, even though he himself is a Kohen.
One situation is, he doesn't call out to the Kohen, he just goes up with the rest of the Kohen.
And makes the bracha,
They
Yevarechecha,
just do the blessing.
and that's it. That's correct. With women and children answering Amen. Okay. If more than 10 Kohanim are present, any more than the actual quorum of 10 should ascend the dais and recite the priestly blessing, and the 10 should remain in their places and respond Amen. I got that wrong. I said you put 10 to give the bracha and a few down to say Amen. It's the reverse. 10 stay down to answer Amen, while everybody else go up to bless. I got it wrong. Yeah. In such a situation, the people should be careful not to call out Kohanim in the synagogue, so that the 10 men who remain in their places will not violate a positive commandment, right? Because if you're called out as a Kohen to come bless, and you don't, you're in violation of a positive commandment. Now, in this instance, well, let's say you have 20 Kohen. So 10 are staying down, 10 are going up to bless. The Chazan should not call out Kohen, because then the 10 who are staying down will be in violation, because they're being called out and they're not going. So in this instance, no calling out. I guess predetermine who are the 10 that are staying down, and let everybody else walk up on their own without being called.
But wait, so I just want to go back when you said there was a mistake. Let's say there's 12 Kohen in, so 10 stay down and 2 go up.
That's
bless.
right.
Okay.
That's right.
And so, but if there's any Kohanim that are staying down, the Chazan.
The Chazan should not call out Kohen.
Not call out, because that's in violation.
That's right, because they're being asked to go up and they're not going up. For though the person making this call is addressing it only to those who exceed the quorum of 10, right? Which means he's only addressing those who are actually going up. But who is to determine who are the additional ones? So in his calling out, it could be implied that he's referring to everybody or anybody, and then the people staying down would be in violation, therefore no calling out. Okay. Even if only one Israelite is present. So you have 30 people in the minyan, one Israelite, 29 Kohanim. So then all the Kohanim should ascend the dais and deliver the priestly blessing, and he, the singular person, excuse me, should respond Amen. For the one Israelite is fit to receive the blessing. The reasons explained above. Even if there's only one Jew to bless, it's worth all the Kohanim. As to the Kohanim, by contrast, although they are blessed together with the Israelites in the priestly blessing, they alone are not considered significant enough to receive it unless there are 10 of them. So one Jew, enough to receive the blessing. But if it's going to be Kohanim receiving the blessing, you got to have at least 10. And if it's not going to be Kohanim, then it's the people in the fields. This is why, when there are fewer than 10 of them to receive the blessing in the synagogue, they should all ascend to the dais and bless their brethren in the field. Similarly, although the women and young children are included in the blessing, they do not fit the Halachick criteria to be considered as a congregation in order to receive the blessing alone. So either you have a single Jew receiving a blessing, or a congregation of Kohanim, 10 people, or the people out in the field. So this, so you can see how technical it gets and how detailed it gets, which is why I'm leaning toward not going through all the laws here, because maybe we'll just, maybe after we get to the next Gemara, we'll come back and look at the laws that just cover what we covered in the Gemara.
Well, we could just go through the Gemara and
But then we, as you can see, the Gemara is only pieces, because you have opinions about interpreting the Gemara, plus you have other sources that complement the sources we're learning. So, you know, this is like get a full picture halachically from the Gemara.
Yeah.
As we can see. More. Okay, have a wonderful day, Yidden.
Yeah.